Hello and welcome to another Biomechanics podcast. We've got something a little bit different today. So this is a new show that we've kind of thought up. So we've got Simon here today. Simon Ward, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Tom. I am Simon Ward from the SWAT Inner Circle and the triathloncoach.com. You may have listened to some of the podcasts that Tom has been kind enough to do with me on my show. So now I'm returning the favour.
Yeah, and the reason that we've done this is because essentially every time that we've done the podcast for Simon's show, I've kind of come down to Simon's house, we've had a cup of coffee, and basically we've talked for about an hour before we even recorded the show. We talked about all these different subjects. So I said, well, at some point I think we should probably record this stuff because it gets really interesting and it's kind of what I find out, what Simon's found out. So this time we thought we'd do a kind of, and we've been playing on the name, I think Coach's Convo or something like that. I think we'll try and probably come up with something a bit more catchy, maybe. But yeah, so we decided today that we'd talk today about, there's a question on one of the Facebook groups, I think it was, about cramps, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it started with whether calf guards were beneficial and whether there was anything in them. Should you wear them to run in or should you just wear them for recovery? And then it sort of developed from there and it's gone down a few rabbit holes, which we'll probably disappear down from and come out of today.
Exactly, yeah. I think the original question I think was the person put in about calf guards, and then their idea was that it was then related to whether it was related to cramp and whether they could stop him or getting cramp, kind of particularly lower leg cramp during a race. So both me and Simon put some of our kind of opinions across, and of course with any of those kind of open groups there's been about 100 different replies from 100 different people, and I think we decided to do a bit of recording today just to basically talk about the bits or kind of our point of view, where the science is at on this side of things, particularly related to cramps and exercise, because it was evident from the kind of responses that there was a lot of misinformation being kind of thrown around.
Well, yeah, I agree, and it's a question I get asked a lot, Tom, is, why do I cramp up when I get in the swimming pool? I think one guy said he went for an open water swim first time this year, so first time he's put his wetsuit on, so that could be a cause. First time he's gone in cold water, so we know how people get anxious and therefore tense, so that could be a cause. He may have done some training earlier on in the day, a run or a bike that might have caused some muscular fatigue and tension, so there could be something there. It may be that because it was quite hot in the last few days that he was dehydrated, and maybe you'll sort of probably expand on that bit, was maybe he was dehydrated, maybe there was some salts, but it's very unusual to get cramp 400 metres into a session. That's less than 10 minutes in.
Yeah. And
for me, I don't think that dehydration or lack of salt is the issue there. I think it's something else.
No, and that's the thing, is that every time, if you ever mention cramp, almost the first response is going to be something around electrolytes. That's the thing, is that dehydration kind of gets banded around a few times, but it's always salt, it's always electrolytes, and it's partly because, to be honest, it's because of the marketing systems in place for the people that try and sell salt tablets. Because at the end of the day, that's essentially, there are a lot of people that are putting a lot of the information out there, right? You need, if you need to replace your electrolytes, otherwise you will get cramp. You just have to look on a few prominent salt kind of tablet and salt electrolyte replacement sites, and cramps are mentioned all over it, even though actually when you look into the evidence, there isn't really any evidence. And the critical thing about the evidence is the idea that salt had anything to do with cramps there was a few old studies where I think they gave a kind of sodium chloride solution to mine workers, kind of that stopped them getting cramps. But actually, again, the thing about it is that you've got to start thinking about why that happened, and that's what I'm going to want to kind of expand on, and why that actually may be related to the cramps, but why it's probably not the reason why the electrolyte tablets are being sold the way they are. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think we know that marketeers will jump on anything they can to promote the product, and we also know that triathletes are suckers. If we're not upsetting too many people, for scientific information which might prove a tenuous answer to their problem. We all want a solution. The easy solution to cramp is somebody to give you a tablet. That's exactly, everybody wants a silver bullet or a magic pill. So if you're getting cramps, then the magic pill is put this in your drink, let it dissolve, and then sup it, and it will all stop. And of course, there will be some people who benefit from that, and they're the N=1 study.
Yep.
And of course, we know that wouldn't be allowed in in the medical field,
Yeah,
an N equals
exactly.
1 study, but that one person will then shout very loudly, hey, I tried these and it worked for me, so then all the friends jump on the bandwagon.
There are a few prominent people, I know, I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but people that have then found this and found it to be a great benefit, and then they will talk about it, and that's absolutely fine. The thing is, I'm not saying, and I don't want to ever say that replacing salt and sodium and during exercise isn't either important or helps. I mean, a good example, so we'll go back to, so a person that's done a lot of work on this is Tim Noakes. Now, I'm going to talk about Tim from any standpoint at the moment, because actually, on the diet side of things, he's gone a little bit over the edge, shall we say. But however, his work originally around Waterlogged, the book on salt and replacement, these things, it was all written from a perspective of the fact that giving people a load of Gatorade, which had very low salt, but it was almost overhydrating, he believed, and either Gatorade or overfeeding with water in races could lead to hyponatremia and people were dying.
Yeah.
The critical thing is that happens, I was thinking about this earlier, that happens a lot in a lot of races and people aren't dropping dead all over the place. The odd person dies from hyponatremia, and why is that? Probably because something else is going on. And the thing about this is that exercise, often, it's not normally the fittest athletes. Rarely do the fit athletes die of these things. And the reason that's important is because a fit athlete has trained their body to deal with the rigours of exercise. A non-fit athlete who's maybe doing more than they, and this goes back to the cramps and all these things, is doing maybe more than they are conditioned for, it puts a massive stress on the body. We know that it causes things like leaky gut and all these things, and the less fit you are and all these things, the more you can react to those situations.
Well, I guess that's the same as, we had that tragic incident with the guy off MasterChef who died during the London Marathon. He had a heart attack, it gets into the popular press, and then the wider general public that perhaps isn't as engaged with athletics and sport in the way that we are, will look at that and say, well, that just proves that marathon... I've always said marathon running is bad for you. That just proves it. That guy's doing a marathon and he's done lots of them and he's died now, so clearly it's not good for you. But there was probably something that we haven't found out about yet that we will find out later that was involved there. And it's not the marathon running.
No.
It may be the fact that he had a congenital heart problem, which would have shown up at some point.
Yeah.
He could have been walking along the street or lifting something in his garage, but unfortunately he just happened to be doing a marathon.
Well, that's the thing is actually, I've done a little bit of background in cardiology, and we saw a spate of young people in their 20s having heart attacks during sport and exercise. And we started looking for all these congenital abnormalities, and we're finding actually, do you know what? What do they have? They had ischemic heart disease, which is basically the same heart disease that causes heart attacks in 50-year-olds, furring up of the arteries. Except these guys are 25, and well, why are they getting there at 25? Because they were smokers, because they ate fish and chips every night, and I'm serious. Actually, we know now that the diet and lifestyles of young people is causing heart disease to develop very young.
Yes, I've heard
so we
that,
know that actually, but if you opened up, I'm 32. Simon, how old are you? If you don't mind me saying?
I'm 54 now, Tom.
So if we looked in your arteries, we looked in my arteries, we would see some significant furring up, because that's what happens. Now,
well, I'm just doing a heart research study at the moment in London, Tom. So I've done one part of it. There's 2 more to go, but they'll be.
They won't go quite that far.
But the point is that we'll be able to find out exactly how healthy my heart, and maybe we can come back and discuss that on another podcast.
Exactly. Well, my heart's a little bit unhealthy. My heart rate is very slow, and my heart is. It misses a few beats here and there. It's got a bit of abnormal electrical activity, and that is a response. That's the response to doing lots of endurance exercise. But the key thing is that actually we don't know what happened with some of these people, but it may be that what they did was overexertion, and that's the key thing to remember: is that as humans, we are meant to run as a form of transport, as finding food, maybe even for fun, possibly. We don't know. The key thing is that we were meant to run ultra marathons very slowly. We were never meant to push ourselves to the point of absolute exhaustion. Now, often these things happen during races. Why do they happen during races? Because people push themselves a little bit further.
So what we're leading, we've sort of gone off the subject, but actually I wonder if we have really, because these incidences that people talk about where they're getting cramp, to come back to our original discussion, most of these people are pushing themselves beyond what's generally recommended for healthy fitness training.
Yeah.
They're pushing themselves, and if we say that this arose out of a post on a page called the Ironman Journey, so you'd assume that most of the people on there are preparing for an Ironman, and because of that, they're probably training 8 to 10 hours a week, which in some people's minds is actually quite a low load, but in the minds of the medical profession, it's probably double what's recommended. So they are pushing themselves. We know from looking at the triathletes, if we take a cross-section of 1,000 entrants, that not everyone's super well conditioned, if you look at them. And so what you're saying there is that these people are still, even if they think they're just going for an easy swim, they're getting cramp because their general load across a few days is overexerting themselves, and their body's not caught up with that demand yet, and it's rebelling. I suppose in some ways you could say the body's protecting itself. If it gives you cramp and you can't carry on, then it's saving itself from further damage.
Well, that's the thing. We think, it's sort of a protective mechanism. It's basically, the thing about cramp is that what it actually is. It's a dysregulation. It's neural. It's to do with the kind of stretch receptor response and what's called the Golgi tendon complex. The basic thing of going on, without going into kind of details, is that's why it's this disorder in your response, and this is a key thing as to why that happens. And we know now that it's very difficult, or it is at least the only way of reproducing a cramp in a lab is to fatigue a muscle. You can that's how you do it. You don't reduce its electrolytes. You don't do anything else. You fatigue it. And that's the key thing. But the thing about triathlon is it's not normal. That's all not natural.
It's not.
It's not. No, we weren't designed
We're not normal then.
No, we weren't born on bikes. But what it does, the funny thing is actually, if you canvass cramps and the incidence of cramps in racing, and you look at things like ultra running as an example of running versus triathlon versus or maybe cycling, the biggest by an absolute mile is triathlon. Even elite athletes, elite runners rarely get cramp like they've been shot. They rarely suddenly stop because they've suddenly got leg cramps. You never see a group of Kenyan athletes and one suddenly stop and have to be stretched out. We see it obviously in footballers running around, but again they're applying lots of different forces all over the place. But it can often be in when they've been over fatigued, i.e. it's always an extra time and it's beyond their level of normal running. The key thing is that triathlon is quite common. I mean, I listened to an interview earlier with, I think it was Josh Amberg, and he was talking about how he was racing against, I want to say possibly Luke Bell or somebody, and that they were running together up to 20k in the marathon, and Luke just suddenly got cramp and stopped.
Oh, Mont Tremblant maybe. He won. Did he win that one? But he got cramp.
I think somebody. Well, I think he was saying he won it, and the person he was running with got cramp. And that's the thing. That's quite. Most elite or top level triathletes, particularly long distance, would say that. And the key thing is, what swimming, biking, and running allows you to do that running often doesn't, is it pushes your body generally into the levels of fatigue, particularly muscle fatigue, beyond what is capable in a single sport. Because normally, other mechanisms, more central mechanisms. Okay, so I think we just lost the recording for a second then, so we're going to try and start where we kind of left off. So I think I was saying about Josh Amberger, and he said basically the fact that these you get in triathlon you have the ability to fatigue muscles more, but also there are other things in place. So I think let's go back to the kind of question at hand. So we've got this idea of if people are getting cramps, and we've had lots of different opinions of electrolytes and all these bits and pieces. Well, we know that the cramp is this kind of it's an end point. It's like a perfect storm, which is why, because it's all these different factors, why different people get them from different situations, but also why they then seem to have different remedies. Because essentially, you're trying to find, if you are getting them continuously, what the one thing is the last factor almost. What is the bit that actually precipitates it? So, but we know that fatigue is a big part of it. But there's also things like, and this goes back to really interesting to the question. So I've personally, the only issue I've ever had with cramps is in swimming. And actually, I'd never had them from fatigue in swims, although occasionally I used to get them a little bit in my quad muscles in a wetsuit after I biked hard that day. Now I did feel that was related to the compression from the wetsuit, because you do get that compression. I was wearing a suit that was designed for my body size, my torso size, which always had slightly tighter legs than my legs were. So I always dealt with that a bit, and it was fine when I hadn't biked before. But I found that after I'd biked, maybe my legs had swollen a bit, maybe something was actually adding to that compression. But I'd occasionally get like a, not proper cramp, but just like a almost tetchiness. Now I then started having a problem a couple of years ago. I was doing an Ironman, And I noticed this problem in training leading up to it, but I changed my wetsuit to one that fitted my body a bit better. So it didn't let in water, but what it did do was, because of the arms and legs, because of this short torso, I ended up with a size small. So I had arms and legs that looked like a child's suit, basically, and they came up to my my elbows and my knees. So this wetsuit finished just below my knee. And what I was finding in that wetsuit, because it didn't have any kind of release calf, anything like that kind of thing that's on some of these suits, I was finding that when I've been swimming for a little while, I'd suddenly get these cramps in my calf, in both calves. It's really
like something was causing a restriction of blood flow,
exactly.
for instance.
However, it often didn't happen in training. So I was trying to work out, well, I'm wearing this wetsuit in training as well. What's causing this? I worked out the one factor that was different was in races, I wear a special pair of, they're compressive because of their size, but they're not supposed to be. It's actually calf aero socks. Type thing made by I was using, I think, the Aerocoach ones, and now I use Enduro ones, and but a combination of those plus where the wetsuit was finishing was actually compressing the top part of the muscle in my calf, and that was leading to the cramp. So why does that lead to a cramp? That muscle wasn't fatigued at all, but the compression was either causing some kind of neural response, but also possibly causing a less blood flow, which is where the dehydration argument comes in, which again, secondary to that, could be where the salt argument comes in almost, because salt could help indirectly if it allows you to absorb more fluid, keeping you better hydrated, which allows more blood flow in those external muscles. Because we often notice, as you say, cramps, as we said, is that often in the lower leg, or they're often some people get in the toes.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right, and of course we're talking about very individual solutions to this. So we could get 100 people, some of whom don't get cramps, some of whom get it occasionally. So it's finding out, well, what environmental factors, what different things have been involved there. It seems to be that most people hang on the idea that calf guards will provide a plaster, sticking plaster to this, or that salt tablets will be the sticking plaster to this, but it generally goes a bit deeper than that. So in your case, I know you're quite analytical, so you've looked at all of them and narrowed it down to a couple of things. So your individual solution is probably around this wetsuit and what you do, but I know you're also diligent about your hydration and your salt intake. For me, a lot of the people I see, they seem to forget that when they're running in a triathlon, they've already cycled for quite a long way, and the soleus muscles are active, as we know, in that cycling. If their foot position's not good, if they're dropping their toes too much, if they've got weak soleus and then they're trying to run on that, those muscles are already pretty tired. So they're then going back to your original point, that they're then stressing those to the point of fatigue.
Yeah.
Most people, according to the physios that I'm using, can't do the required number of calf raises to be strong enough to actually for the calf muscles and the Achilles to work effectively during a 10k run, never mind a marathon. So you see this Ironman shuffle where the muscles are basically, and the feet have stopped working efficiently, so they're using different muscles, and those muscles are getting to the point of fatigue. Most people, I wonder as well, particularly in the older guys, how much, that you talk about the neural stuff, how much pelvic position from the wetsuit and being on the bike for so long is causing issues in the lower back, and therefore disturbing, neural responses down the spine, and that's causing. Because one of the guys mentioned having an electric spasm type of thing, and you think, well, that's got to be something that's neural, and so there must be some interruption to 100% neural signal going down the spinal column, and the end result of that is the calf and the foot.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, is that so this is where the neural excitability argument comes in, is that it's not the root cause, however, it enhances the susceptibility to it. So, for instance, another example, go on an offshoot, going back to my original story, looking at the fact that I was getting more issues, or the only time I was getting issues was possibly in a race. Now, I looked at what do I have before a race? I often have a double espresso, a lot of caffeine before a race, and also I'm a bit more excited. I've already got a lot of kind of adrenaline flowing.
Well, what about the stress?
Oh yeah, exactly.
What about the stress that's brought on by a race that you don't get? And I mean, we could talk. I'd like to talk about this in relation to how your gut feels on race morning. Because if you said to me, right, Si, we're going to go down to the lake tomorrow, we're just going to have a swim for an hour, right, I love swimming in the lake, so no stress there for me. Then we're going to ride around Yorkshire, we're going to do 4 or 5 hours, and then we're going to go for a little run up and down the canal. It's great. Yeah, I'll sleep well tonight, I won't be at all nervous in the morning.
Someone mentioned that on the thread, stress, and that's massively important, because actually we know that, for instance, if you look into the kind of neuropathic pain argument and these things, you'll find that, when people are suffering from a lot of neuropathic pain, then one thing they need to do is relax, because actually their own stress or feelings of stress cause them to tense, and that increases that neuroexcitability. Some people respond to chocolate. Dark chocolate causes increase in neuroexcitability and can increase neuropathic pain. So you start to put a pattern together, and this is why you come back to cramp. The thing about cramp, as we said before, is that the electrolyte argument is like cramp is cramp is cramp. Well, actually, we've just talked about 10 different types of cramp that may have 10 different types of causes. So let's go over. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of cramp that are seen in triathlon and why they are completely different causes. Okay. So we've got one of the ones that is so common, which is quad cramp in the run off the bike. Why is that happening? Why does that not happen in the best runners? The reason is because when you land, when you're running, and particularly obviously you're kind of running off the bike, your quad isn't used to propel you in the run. Really, it might involve a little bit of the push off at the back part of the stride, but actually most elite runners don't push off. They essentially use the recoil and using their glute to extend. What their quad does is when you're upright and you're landing with a slightly softened knee, is the quad acts to almost like an eccentric loader, which means it basically holds as it contracts or lengthens slightly as it contracts and stops you from sitting back.
So it's a stabiliser.
Yeah, it's part of the stabilising system.
Yeah.
The key thing is that people come off the bike, if they have, I'm not going to say bad running form because there is no such thing. Running form is a representation of how you move and all these factors. But if you come off the bike, you've been sat for a long time. Now, I see a lot of runners, particularly triathletes, when they run off the bike, they are sat down. Now, if you imagine, I'll get you to do a little exercise at home. If you listen to this, stand up, stand on one leg, and just bend your knee ever so slightly and sit back, and suddenly you will feel how much more stress the quad is doing. It's holding up. You'll feel it switch on, feel it, and when you bring yourself completely tall over that standing leg, it goes off again. That's the critical thing. So you come off the bike, you're landing slightly sat down, and this quad is having to hold on to almost the whole of your upper body weight as you're almost falling backward. This quad is taking the back. Now it might have cycled for over 100 miles, obviously if you're doing an Ironman, and it's put a lot of effort in concentrically.
Well, what about if you've got a bike position that's too far forward and it's quad dominant as well?
Exactly. Yeah. So we want to use the glutes a lot, but if we are using massive, a lot of, as I say, triathletes end up far. I don't like a forward position on the bike because I think you get very quad dominant. You don't use your glutes, and your glutes are a much more efficient muscle, and hip extension is really, really important on the bike. But if you're pushing down hard all the time, particularly if you've got a high saddle. I hate this idea that we've gone to higher and higher and higher saddle positions, and I think it's a horrible bike positioning. The guys off Slow Twitch and people like Dan Empfield seem to go on about this, and the forward high saddle position, not only is it less aero, but it's horrible it might improve peak power. This is what annoys me about studies. It might improve your ability to put out 1,000 watts, but actually it would inhibit your ability to maintain a few hundred watts for hours because you get less glute, basically.
Okay.
Anyway, side point, but very important.
Another rabbit hole.
Exactly. So the quad is fatigued, you come off and you're sitting down, and so there's no wonder why. What actually happens is, so when we contract a muscle, or there is more than this, but it's really basic thinking about it, is that muscle contraction is either shortening, which is concentric, isometric, which is like your plank, so it's not moving basically, and eccentric, which is lengthening.
Yep.
Now eccentric is very, very heavy load. I mean, it's very hard.
And this is where we get DOMs from.
Exactly.
Like the eccentric load, because basically, in my layman's language, the leg wants to bend at the knee, and so that's lengthening the quadricep muscle. But if the quadricep muscle lets go, you'll collapse.
Yeah.
So it's trying to shorten.
Exactly.
So you're basically pulling from two different ends.
Exactly.
And you're creating micro tears.
Exactly.
So if you did a microscopic analysis of quadricep muscle fibres the day after, you'd find all sorts of little bits of muscle damage there, and that's the muscle soreness caused by the trauma of this eccentric loading every time you land and your knee bends.
Yeah. Exactly.
And if you just did 5 minutes of fast running downhill, you get the same thing.
Exactly. That's the thing. So that's the key thing is that. So it's that eccentric load which is so damaging, or essentially puts so much stress. So what do you do about it? Okay, firstly, obviously you're thinking if you're around before the race or whatever, you're looking at obviously running biomechanics and that side of things. When it actually happens, the most important thing is to try and run really tall. Run really tall and try and think if you're cramping, you are sitting down. Try and stop that sit. So that's the thing you can do in the moment.
So I want to make sure the hips are forward. And tall.
Yeah, short strides.
Yeah.
Try not to sit back. That's all you got to think about. Hips forward as much as you possibly can.
So if you get more eccentric work from the quads if you're landing with your foot in front of your body, because it's acting as a brake. So if you think about running downhill, most people tend to try to slow down when they're running downhill, particularly if it's steep, and so the foot lands in front, so there's a braking effect, and a lot of that braking is done by the quadriceps, so it's just putting it under greater load. So shorter strides with the foot landing under the body means less braking, means less involvement from the quads, and you can just take the load off a bit.
Okay. But the key thing about that is it's confidence, because actually if you're currently cramping because of that, if you try and run very tall, actually it might initially hurt more that you'll be almost creating more shock through that muscle, because you'll be landing with a slightly straight, because you're almost sitting down to try and absorb the impact, because you think that's a good thing. Actually, that absorption, that impact, that sitting back is causing more tearing.
So we're wanting to do the opposite of what we instinctively want.
Exactly, that's the key thing. So that's the quad. So the other one we mentioned is the calf. Now, the thing about the calf is that I've seen so many people that have said they've got calf cramps during Ironman run. Turns out it wasn't the calf. Turns out it was a little muscle next to the calf called the tibialis posterior. Right. And it's a pain in the ass muscle. I see it in runners so many times. It has trigger points in it. It's a real nightmare. The reason it often has trigger points in it in triathletes, which is time and time again, is cleats that are worn and cleats that are too far forward. Yeah. So I believe all triathletes, I actually re-drill my shoes to put my cleat not fully midfoot, but close, towards midfoot, because the other remaining, and I now I go back to Shimano. I used to use Speedplay, but they created like this lateral rocking that is provided by pedals like Keo's a little bit, but worn cleats and pedals like the Time Systems are a nightmare. They can help provide sometimes more power, but so what I mean by lateral rocking is if you were to clip the shoe in, you want float, possibly. I don't actually have any because I don't like it at all. But the only type of float you want is a minimal amount where you can turn the shoe left to right, but the shoe remains completely flat on the pedal. So no side to side rock. If you've got any side to side rock, i.e. a worn cleat, every time you press down, that tibialis posterior is trying to basically adjust the foot.
I've seen one of the exercises that they've done with the triathletes in Leeds is for tibialis posterior, where you stand on a bench or a step with half the inside of your foot in, and you just almost, is that inversion or eversion? I can't remember when you're turning in towards your ankle, but you just let the foot go down and then roll back to strengthen this muscle up. So there is probably some dry land. There's probably some non-running conditioning you can do for that muscle just to strengthen it up. So it's a very rarely known exercise outside rehab and physio circles, I would suggest.
And I do a lot of work with people. I get them to kind of put their foot across to their knee and then get them to work into the trigger point at the same time as rotating their foot. So I'm going to show Simon what I mean now, and I'll at some point basically I get them to work in. The muscle sits on the inside, just inside the calf, between the calf muscle at the back and the kind of shin bone.
So how about I describe this? So what I can see Tom doing is he's got his left ankle resting on top of his right knee, and if you were to trace down the side of his lower leg, there's the shin bone.
Yep.
And then just behind the shin bone, there's the belly of the gastrocnemius. And then in between those two, up against the back of that muscle wall, he's just rubbing his fingers into that sort of little groove that you'd be able to see.
Yeah. So you sometimes can feel a trigger point about halfway down. And particularly everyone that, when they land, they kind of turn inwards slightly, because the thing is, you get a trigger point halfway down the muscle. Yeah. The brain thinks the muscle's at full length, and it's not, because it's shortened. So when they come to land, and I watch this in the videos on the treadmill, is that they turn their foot inwards because the brain thinks that it's perpendicular, it thinks it's flat. Now, the way I work is if you find that trigger point and you put your thumb in it, I then get into small circles with their ankle. So if you can describe what I'm doing now, Simon.
Yeah, so you've got to press both thumbs down. So we're about midpoint down, almost near the bottom of the gastrocnemius on the inside. And Tom's just doing some foot circles with his left foot there. Just trying to draw a circle, as big a circle as possible, whilst exerting a little bit of pressure onto that trigger point. And that's a common technique that physios use, is to get the thumbs or their elbow into a trigger point, and then you have to move or extend the muscle against that to create some sort of friction and movement, and irritate
it. It's often
bit,
caused, I see in triathletes, by basically cleats that are worn.
Okay.
And so therefore, you're getting this cramp because basically what's happened is you spent the whole bike leg with a flappy around heel. Now the other thing I just mentioned is that cleat position. Triathletes, I believe, should use a cleat position that is all the way back, because particularly long distance. Now if you are trying to get max, and this is someone like Andrew Starkowitz, great example. If you look at his cleat position, very far forward, does a great bike, he does half a good run, and then he literally can't run the second half of the marathon.
Well, so let me hypothesize here. So if I was going to do an exercise to strengthen my soleus muscle, the first thing I would be doing is bending my knees, because we know the soleus works better when the knee's flexed, and the gastroc works when the leg's straight. Yeah?
Yeah.
So I bend my knees, and then I raise up onto my tiptoes, which is exactly the same position as you'd be if you were pedalling with cleats right at the front of your shoes. So the soleus is almost under load nearly all of the time.
Exactly, and it doesn't need to be.
And
it's not going to provide much.
And we know that Andrew Starkowitz is trying to ride under 4 hours for an Ironman, and he's probably putting out 350 watts while he's doing it.
Is for someone like him, he's trying to use that to put out maximum watts. So an elite time trialist, they will have their cleats forward because they'll use an ankling to get an extra bit of move, basically an extra bit of power from the calf. As triathletes, we don't need that. Right. The critical things, what we need to do is, and the thing is, going back to the eccentric side of things, the reason we then get calf cramps is because, and this is why people like Starkowitz get halfway through the marathon and then suddenly they stop. And if you watch their running gait change, the first half of the run, the first half of the marathon, they have got a nice kind of essentially bouncy stride. They're using their forefoot to land, they get in the recoil. But halfway through, it looks like they've been shot. Now, why does that happen? It's because their calf, their soleus, their gastrocnemius working together, have lost the eccentric loading ability. So that's what the calf does when we run. It doesn't push off. It's not like a spring. It's a spring. And what it does is basically the calf holds onto the Achilles tendon to allow that spring to basically charge and then recoil. Yeah,
so think of an elastic band. You pull the elastic band and then you let it go, and you've got all that stored energy in order to let it go. And the further you stretch it, the more stored energy is, so the more spring it's got.
And your hand in that analogy is your calf. It is the bit holding on to the elastic band now. So you get off the bike and it's been fatigued because of your forward cleat position, and you've been using it throughout every pedal stroke because you've got a high saddle and a cleat right far forward. You've almost got, and think about eccentric strength. If anyone's ever done any eccentric loading, so we used to do it at the gym for when I was trying to be a rugby player, and we were trying to get big and really strong. And the way we used to do eccentric loading on the chest, for instance, is you on a bench press, and you'd have maybe 40, 50 kilos, a weight that you could easily bench press. You push that up, and then two massive rugby players would push down on the weight as you had to load it as slowly as possible. Okay. And that's eccentric loading.
We used to do it a different way. We'd get help in lifting and then just lower. You control the lowering.
Essentially,
likewise, if you climbed up onto a ladder, got your chin over the bar, and then lowered yourself as slowly as possible, counting to 10.
Yeah, exactly.
That's super slow.
But if you try this exercise again and again, there'll be a point where suddenly you literally can't, you suddenly drop, you lose eccentric power. It's almost like a switch. As opposed to concentric, shortening, if you do that concentrically, you just keep fatiguing gradually more and more, and then eventually you just can't fully lift the weight anymore. Whereas eccentric's like a all or nothing.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So they fatigue this calf over and over again, and suddenly it's gone. This causing cramps, causing this dysregulation, causing this massive fatigue, and this is why suddenly people slow down.
So what can we do about that then?
Well, one thing we have to do is train our eccentric load of the calf. So you said about calf raises. I don't actually do calf raises on a single leg. I do 2 up. You hold right onto your tiptoes. So you go right up onto your tiptoes on a step or something similar, and then holding onto something to balance, just kind of leaning against something, you take one foot off, you hold on that other foot on the tiptoes, and then you slowly lower it down.
So this is like, is it Ericsson or one of the Swedish physiotherapy trainings for Achilles repair and rehab?
That's exactly the same.
This is eccentric lowering.
Well, that's the point, is that it's used for rehab, but we should be doing this as prehab. That's the point.
I agree.
Almost all rehab actually is more serves a better purpose as prehab.
Well, absolutely, but minus the pain, frustration, and expense.
Exactly. So that's the key thing. So, but the other thing is this is where things like shoe drop come in. Now, I like an ultra shoe. It is wide fitting in the right way, and that the toes can spread. However, I don't like them for long distance stuff. For a reason, for a lot of people, because they are zero drop. Now, I like zero drop if you've got the strength to control it. However, the thing about having a heel raise is I don't want it there most of the time. But when you fatigue, sometimes you need it. So that's the thing, is actually, we've got this thing about zero drop. And actually, I like ultras for their shape and space, but actually, I'm not adverse to a little bit of a heel raise for particularly long distance stuff, because you start to fatigue,
right,
and you start to not be able to. And actually, do you know what? You probably at that point, it's almost like at that point, halfway through, if someone came and, I mean, I actually thought about this Don't
tell me you're going to wear high heels for your next Ironman.
Well, I was thinking about it. But the thing is, I actually asked, and when I was going to do a race, I went to Ironman and asked them, can I put a different pair of shoes in my special needs bag for halfway through the run? And they said no. You're not allowed to change your shoes in an Ironman, apparently. That's part of the rules. I have no idea. It's part of the rules. You're not allowed to change your shoes on the run course. The key thing is I was going to start off the run with a pair of shoes that didn't have a drop, because I get my elastic recoil. Then as I was starting to fatigue, and this is what I noted, I've noted in the long races I've done, is that there's a point where you hit a point where, do you know what? I can't keep my heel off the ground anymore. My eccentric loading ability has diminished.
So what this is almost saying, I understand that, zero drop is almost like a lifestyle statement for a lot of people. Wearing these minimalist shoes is a bit, in footwear terms, it's a bit like low carb, high fat. And yet, as we've talked about before, sometimes you have to abandon your low carb, high fat principles when you get to a race because of the greater good.
Context.
And what you're saying here is a similar principle, is that you have to abandon your minimalist principles in order to race more efficiently.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that actually, is that context, is that I believe all day-to-day shoes should be zero drop.
Yeah.
In that we should be on flat shoes.
Or barefoot as well.
Or barefoot, yeah. That's the key. But actually, in a long-distance triathlon, actually there is a benefit from having that raise, because it protects you just a little bit when you start to fatigue. And people that then go to zero drop, they're just basically causing that, because at the end of the day, yes, ideally, you'd be able to, someone like Patrick Lang is a good example, runs beautifully, using huge amounts of elastic recoil. Now, he's trained himself to be able to do that. He's also very light. That's a big difference. 65 kilos, it makes a big difference, because the reason that elite marathoners are light is because the weight has a massive impact on that ability to hold on to that eccentric load. So therefore, they're going to do better over the course of a long distance race because of less weight. However, if you've got enough trained strength, you don't need to worry about the weight. That's the point.
So can I just interrupt you there then? So we seem to keep coming back to this trained strength preparation.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that you and I have talked about at length, both together and individually, is that it's critical. I won't say important, I'll say it's critical that there is this component of strength training away from swimming and biking and running, that it's not good enough just to ride uphill with a big gear, or to run up hills, or to swim with paddles. You've got to do some non-swim, bike and run strength training to condition these small muscles. We're not talking about building big bodybuilder-like quads or a huge chest. No. In fact, we probably wouldn't be wanting to work the anterior chain that much. We'd be wanting to work the glutes and the upper back and the lower back and the hamstrings and the calves. But it's critical that we do some work, quite a lot of work, outside and away from our normal triathlon environment.
Yeah.
And for me, I would be interested in a questionnaire that asks these people about cramp, about how much non-swim, bike and run conditioning they do as well, and what part that played in their issues that they're getting.
The funny thing is, as I listened to this interview, Josh Amberg earlier, I was shocked that he does no strength work. But he does a lot of supposedly strength work on the bike. But I reckon if you canvassed all the pros that have issues, and he has issues with cramp, and all the pros that don't run particularly well off the bike versus the ones that do, I know Jan Frodeno does strength work almost every day.
Craig Alexander does a lot of strength work.
A lot of strength work. Kinley, lots of strength work. The best bike, and that's the other, going back to the cleat position thing, just one final thing I want to mention on that. I did a bit of a little survey looking at cleat position. Now, I'm not saying that guys like Kinley and guys like Frodeno use midfoot cleats. However, based on their foot size, Frodeno's cleats are much further back than is normal. He's actually got special Bont shoes. Kinley has also moved his quite a long way back. Every good bike runner in triathlon at the elite seems to have a more rearward cleat position. Not necessarily midfoot, not fully, because actually fully midfoot is actually can be more problematic because it allows, you don't get the ankling, and actually that can cause even more problems. But somewhere in between is quite good. But the point is, you say, coming back to, is that actually the biggest thing you can do to stop yourself getting cramps, and this is the key thing, is that we're talking about cramps like they're all the same thing. Everyone's got their own, I get cramps in this, I get cramps in and everyone's almost got their own cramp. It's like, well, use that as a tool. That is demonstrating where you need to work. Now, in terms of strength work, what can you do? The way I do it is that a lot of triathletes, I think, do strength work wrong, in that they get this, or should I do high weights, low reps, or should I do low weights, high reps? Well, actually somewhere in between. I do the kind of weight that you could lift. Let's say you could do 4 sets of 8 reps, but you do 3 times 6. It's a heavy enough weight to confer a neuromuscular control response, but not heavy enough to do any damage, but not light enough to be pointless that you could throw around.
No, and I think that for me, that's the problem. Is if a triathlete was to go into a gym and ask for help, a lot of people would say, well, it's an endurance activity, so we need low reps and high weights. Or they go into a gym where they meet up with somebody who prescribes a bodybuilding protocol where we know that they're completely exhausting the protein, and then when the protein synthesis takes place, it causes muscle growth. And of course, we don't want that hypertrophy when we're doing triathlon. We don't really want to be gaining weight unless there's somebody who's got a specific issue there, but that's a very small number of people. Yeah. And also, I think, if you're going to go to the gym, you have to be clear on what your end goal is. If you are trying to make yourself more robust so that you're able to train more consistently and become a better triathlete, then the training has to match that. If you want to do CrossFit and go and do muscle ups and enter Spartan races, that's a different type of training. Now, CrossFit training, in the absence of any other stuff, will help, but it's still, and because of its highly anaerobic nature, it probably is the wrong stuff to be doing anyway most of the year round. It still isn't the right training for most triathletes to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is that actually you don't need to overcomplicate things necessarily, but you need to, I do a few kind of big kind of compound movements. I use a kettlebell a little bit as well. And it's all about finding things that work for you, that help what you need.
Yeah.
But also things like, for instance, what I do is I like a good deadlift, but I use something called a hex bar.
Yeah.
Because I've got very long levers. So a lot of us triathletes got long legs. I also have a back that is historically has had a few issues. So having a hex bar, which is, if you Google it, it's basically almost like a cage.
You stand inside it, yeah.
It means you lift the weight around your centre of gravity rather than having to kind of pivot forward.
So you're slightly further back, aren't you?
Exactly. And the thing is, it isn't always necessary. Actually, a lot of people could just do a standard deadlift and be okay. But I find I can lift much more weight, but also more stable. But the key thing is, what I do is I lift it I do different kinds of it. Sometimes I put a relatively lighter weight on and I lift and jump. I make explosive. But most of the time I'm doing very slow movements, and the key thing is I don't drop the weight. I lower the weight very slowly.
So you've got a constant tension on the muscle.
And it's that constant tension that trains the eccentric component.
So there's a lot of Ben Greenfield's written a lot about super slow training. And I quite like that. I like the kettlebell stuff myself. Exactly. I've definitely moved away from bench press. I don't see any value in bench press unless you're lying on
back and stuff. I like a good chin up and pull up.
Yeah,
but
same for
bench
me.
Press is the worst because most swimmers, it'll pull them forward, and they don't have good back and shoulder and control at all.
No.
So they do more bench pressing than pull ups and chest because most people can't do them.
Well, and the other thing with bench press is that you don't get injured I've found at the top, arm extension. You get injured when you're lowering the bar to your chest. Most people seem to think that if you lower the bar to your chest, that's the correct way. I used to do, when we had people that wanted to do them, we used to put a rolled up towel on the chest, so it was an extra 3 inches of space, and that would be the cue. So you can still get full development there in the range of movement, but if you lower that extra 2 or 3 degrees with the elbows going lower, you're really stretching the anterior shoulder position there and compartment, and that's what causes that nerve damage and the shoulder pain.
And it works on that stretch of the pec major, which is to say, if you overstretch that pec major as you're bringing that bar right to your chest, then there's a reason why, if you go to any gym, you'll see a lot of the bodybuilders wandering around with rolled in shoulders. That's because they bench press tons and they never do any back.
Because that's what you can see in the mirror, Tom.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Yes.
So anyway, how does bench press stop us getting cramp? Or have we disappeared down another rabbit hole? So right. So that was you. Okay. So that was you. So you've got. So let's get back on track. You've got quad cramp.
Yeah.
And calf cramp. So you said there were 3. So what's the other one?
Well, the third one was the tibialis posterior. Okay. So the fact that is distinctly different and has a different cause, i.e., related to things like cleats, stability, but also kind of shoe and foot stability and that side of things as well. I think that what we'll do, so we'll end it now, and we'll end it with a little bit, right, what to do if you're getting cramps, what you need to do. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to find out why. So you've got to keep a diary. You've got to write down what happened, when it happened, why it happened, what you were doing. Was it when, and see if there's a pattern. As simple as that. Is there a pattern to these cramps? Is it in cold water? Is it in these things? And that then starts to lead you down the path of what might help to correct them.
Now, that a lot of people don't do that process. I know that there's a percentage of triathletes, not all, who keep a training diary and can work out that they've got better here because they did lots of cycling there, or they were running 4 times a week and they didn't get injured because they stretched before they keep that. But with these little, if we were asking somebody about their nutrition, if they wanted help losing weight or to change the nutrition, we'd ask them to keep a food diary.
Yeah, exactly.
If we were looking at HRV, we'd be looking for clues as to why HRV was high at certain points, whether it was really low, if it was, plane travel or alcohol or lack of sleep or high levels of stress. So you need to be diligent. You can't just say, "Oh, I get cramp because."
You can't trust your memory.
No.
When it comes to these details, the little details are important. As I say, I can give you my example of my cramp story. It required the details. Now, I thought originally it was like, or is it the coffee? Is it the cold water? What are all these bits and pieces? And actually, none of them on their own was important until the final jigsaw piece was the compression calf guard thing that I was wearing. Going back to the question that was actually asked on Facebook, the final answer to that is actually I think they can cause cramps because I think they can compress, particularly if they're over compressive, and I think they're used as a crutch, and I think you shouldn't need to use them. I think if you're using them and you think they help you, then if you think they help you, then there's an effect there. But actually maybe if you're using them, there's a reason why you feel like you need to use them and actually need to address the root cause.
I can remember a long time ago working with a javelin thrower, quite a prominent javelin thrower, and he was he came out of work, he'd been working part-time, he'd been sitting in meetings all day, went to do his warm-up, he was wearing a pair of compression shorts that came halfway down his thigh, and he got a hamstring pull, turned into a tear just below where the shorts ended. And he said to me, "I'm not wearing these shorts again. These shorts have not kept my muscles warm and therefore I've got a hamstring tear. So I'm not wearing those again." However, it could have been because he'd been unathletic all day, he'd been sat down, so he'd caused his hamstrings and his glutes to switch off. Maybe he'd been adopting a poor posture while he was sat in his chair and he'd irritated his, some nerves that were coming out of his lower spine. Maybe it was just because he hadn't warmed up thoroughly. Maybe it was fatigue from previous strength or weight sessions. So, his immediate culprit was the shorts, which he ditched. Likewise, if he then started wearing a pair of shorts or tights and he hadn't got anything, then he'd be saying, "These tights are brilliant, I'm going to wear these all the time." It's too easy to arrive at that conclusion without significant analysis of what's going on. And I agree with you. If you get cramp and then you suddenly start wearing calf guards and you think that they're the answer, then carry on wearing them. But it's more likely to be psychological because there could be several other things that you've changed as well at the same time as wearing the calf guards.
Exactly. So I mean, so they've got that argument, and then look for the causes and see whether it's safe. When it comes to the salt and hydration argument, salt can help you hydrate better. There's a reason that in medicine we use sodium chloride, not water, because it hydrates better. Salt in water, that's why when they've shown studies of hydration post-exercise, what's the best hydration? It's often from milk, because it's got stuff in it. It slows down the absorption. It means you actually, rather than it going in and out and you peeing it out, you actually increases plasma volume better.
Hey, here's an interesting point for discussion on another podcast is post-race drips. I've always liked those because it gets fluid into you without putting pressure on a queasy stomach. But I know some people are very proud of maintaining it. I've never had a drip after a race thing.
Yeah, but that's things that sodium chloride provides more fluid. So actually, that's I do think you should use salt during long distance racing because it increases the fluid absorption. It may also help increase the glucose absorption because there are transport mechanisms related to sodium and glucose. It's more related to the kidney and how we deal with glucose there. But actually, it is possibly another mechanism of absorbing glucose.
If we're using salt, then just finally on this one. Are we going to use effervescent tablets that are flavoured? Are we going to use stuff like the base salts, where it's actually salt crystals that you can just put onto your fingertip and lick off? Or are we going to use the little salt capsules that are actually in the sort of the little capsule, whatever that substance is that holds it all together?
Well, the thing is, my personal preference really, because obviously, because on particularly long distance racing, I make my own nutrition. So I just put table salt in.
Right.
Table
salt?
Well, not table salt.
Where's the marketing? Where's the big sports nutrition marketing around table salt, Tom?
I do carry little salt packets, the ones you get from McDonald's, because actually salt on the back of your tongue initiates a neural response that can switch off a cramp, and that's the key thing. Is
this what this chili pepper thing?
Yes,
this hot shot spud?
Yes,
and is that? I was thinking about this because one of the guys said he was going to make his own, and he quoted some sort of horrendous sounding pepper, and I wondered, was he really going to solve his cramps, or was he just going to create excruciating pain in his mouth that he'd forget about his cramp?
That's the thing. Is actually people that have found they don't work basically neck it, i.e. they don't put it in the mouth. The whole point is the receptors on the back of the tongue. So you just put salt. This is how pickle juice works. This is the point. Pickle juice is vinegary and salty, and it causes that neural response. That doesn't mean that electrolytes and salt have anything to do with the cramp. It shows that it's a neural thing because obviously you're not going to absorb them that quickly, but suddenly it shuts off the cramp.
Yeah.
So that's why I carry that salt. But I think I think salt has its place in nutrition, but again, you don't need any fancy salt. And also, I still don't see, based on the studies of electrolyte balance, why you would need potassium, why you'd need magnesium.
Yeah, somebody said to me, get magnesium spray and just spray that on your leg.
That's the thing. Well, what magnesium spray can do. So I use magnesium spray locally. I make my own because actually it's ridiculously expensive. Actually, you can make your own with really very cheap. Basically, you have to buy magnesium chloride crystals. You can buy a whole kilo bag off Amazon for about £3, and you dissolve some in water and put it in a spray bottle, and that's magnesium oil.
Okay.
Exactly the same stuff.
You're not going to get MI5 coming round if you start buying large quantities of these chemicals, are you?
Well, not those ones, hopefully. I don't think you make any bombs out of magnesium. But the key thing is that you can rub that onto your muscles and relax. So I used to get fasciculations, which is like twitching the muscles.
Yeah.
When I spray magnesium spray on it, it reduces that.
Oh, okay, right.
But what it's not doing is it's not about the electrolyte. It's all about the fact that magnesium can help relax the muscle down. So if you're sat there and you're fasciculating and the muscle's tense, then and the same as a magnesium bath can help you sleep. It relaxes the body. It's not the same as needing a depleted electrolyte during exercise. That's the difference, is that actually, if you take a shed load in of magnesium during exercise and you don't need any of it, it'll just make you need to go to the toilet, basically. Magnesium is a potent... my words have just forgotten me. It's used for constipation.
Diuretic.
Yeah. If you use for constipation, that kind of toilet. Yes.
Oh, that kind of toilet. Right. You don't want that before a race.
It's a very magnesium is a very kind of potent. Yeah, it's a kind of constipation medication.
Is magnesium the supplement that people take to sleep better, or is that?
Well, yeah, magnesium and zinc. Well, magnesium helps you sleep because it's relaxing.
Right.
That's the point. Is that so when you rub it on the muscles, it can help the muscles relax.
Okay.
But that's not really to do with actually what your kind of the root cause of the cramp. So actually taking a big load of magnesium and these things in, I can see an argument for a small amount of salt based on your normal salt intake. So the idea is, if you're doing an Ironman, we spoke about this before, if you're doing an Ironman, you've got to imagine you are spending the whole day without your normal food. Therefore, the things that you would normally have in your normal food, like salt. So if you put salt on everything, then you've got to put some salt, because your body is going to get used to having lots of salt and used to dealing with it. So one day, the day before the race, you're salting stuff. Then the day of the race, it's going to ask. So
you really, in this itemisation in your little notebook of all the things that might be causing cramp, you really should be making a note of how much salt you really consume during the day. So if let's say you were consuming, what would be an average human consumption of salt per day?
6 grams, maybe?
6 grams. So if you're consuming 6 grams of salt a day, there's a good possibility that on your Ironman day you're not consuming that. So you'd want to try and spread out throughout the day 6 grams of salt.
Yeah. 6 grams I think is the maximum.
And you're saying that this is an opportunity to use McDonald's for some good.
Exactly.
For a change.
Oh yeah.
So we'll go to McDonald's and buy the table salt.
Exactly. I pick them up on the way to races. There's always somewhere like some of the channel, and there's a thing, and you pick. I put a little hamper. I put them in a little pocket. Don't put them in the swim though, because they're in little paper packets and they'll go soggy.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's what I think. So that's the thing. Is when it comes back to cramps, it's a fact finding mission. That will then give you the answer. You can't give an answer because everyone's pattern is slightly different. So this is when you go through all that, but you write it all down, and then maybe this is the point where you enlist an expert. This is when you enlist somebody who will be able to go through it all with you and say, well, actually, this is all pointing to a certain direction, or they'll be able to give you the tools of things to look for, or they'll just look from the outside. I think that's what that's what an expert is there for. They're there for pattern. Doctors, we are taught as pattern recognition. That's all it is. People think that medicine is amazingly complicated, where it isn't. It's basically, right, the blood pressure is low. Give them some fluid.
You only have to watch Dr. House to understand how that's done, isn't it? Let's look at all the possible things it could be and slowly eliminate them until we're left with several culprits.
It's all pattern recognition. Yeah. It's all simple stuff first. Pattern recognition. What happens? It's all a flow chart in your head, and that's the same as every bit of triathlon has to be that flow chart. It has to be you need to keep a diary. If you don't keep a diary in these things, you'll never. This is what coaches do. The benefit of a coach is really they're keeping your diary for you. They're the ones that are going to say, well, do you know what, you responded to this training, or you did this, you wrote this down, you should do this. I
guess the other thing is that we're such suckers for information as triathletes that we sometimes have too much in our heads, and that's where the coach or the expert comes in. Is that they're the filters. They're the ones who can go, actually, we can forget that. Actually, this one isn't right. I think these are the two things that we need to focus on now.
Exactly, context and relevance, basically.
Yeah.
That's what Anyway, I think we've talked enough.
Yeah.
About that side of things, so we have to leave it for now. But what we're going to do with these kind of conversations is try and keep things relevant.
Yeah.
Basically, questions that come up, because they're the ones. At the end of the day, we could probably pick subjects that we could talk all day about, but actually, are they what people are asking about? Well, clearly, people are asking on those groups. Clearly, questions like that, by the fact that 50 plus people responded, are what people want to hear about.
Well, one of the other conversations that came up on one of my cafe pages was, what do people eat during triathlons? So, related but different to what we've just discussed. And once again, a whole series of rabbit holes we could disappear down. Maybe that's the next one, Tom.
Because we're all very unique. Yeah. So it's not about the answer, it's about how you find your answer. That's what we want to try and provide.
And for me, that's the brilliant thing about coaching. That's what I love, is seeking solutions to these problems. And when you get a coach, here's the thing that I would say is, when you get a coach, you can have all sorts of qualifications. You can have all sorts of letters and numbers after your name. But there's no substituting finding a coach that's had the experience of finding solutions to these issues. Coaches that have got qualifications but 1 year of experience just don't have the problem-solving experience that coaches have been around for a long time. And that's often what differentiates good coaching from not good coaching, its ability to solve problems.
I think that's the thing, and I think just adding in there, I think there's that element of experience, but also, when it comes to that, is that also the person as well, is that there's some people that might not have been in the sport for a long time, but ask literally 10 million questions a day, so they've searched for all those answers, so they can have and there's some people that have been in the sport for a long time, have just said, well, accepted wisdom is accepted wisdom, I'm never going to question anything, and may not be able to do that side of things. So it's all kind of, but that's kind of, I think, part of the point. Part of the excitement of triathlon itself is, as you say, problem solving and doing that kind of work. Yeah. Anyway, Simon, do you want to finish on just telling the listeners where they can find out more about you and what you do?
Yes, well, you can visit me or visit my page, simonwardtriathloncoach.com. So you can find out a bit more about me there, or thetriathloncoach.com, which is another of our sites. If you want to follow me on Facebook, I am Simon Ward 1. That's my general Facebook page. Or you can join the Triathlon Coach Cafe, which is an engaged triathlon community. Less arguing than some of the other sites and less name calling. But we've got about 2,500 members there, and you'll be asked some new member questions, so an opportunity to ask me and Tom and maybe some of the other experts to help solve some of your problems. And I also have my own podcast, which Tom's been on a few times, called the SWATcast, the triathloncoach.com SWATcast. The latest version is out today, although you may not be listening to this podcast for a while, but anyway, it comes out every Wednesday. So there's plenty of places you can search for me. You'll all be welcome with open arms, and that's it. So thanks for having me, Tom. It's been great.
No worries at all, no worries. And also you can find us at kind of triomechanics.co.uk and our stuff on Twitter and Facebook under Triomechanics, offering kind of running analysis, coaching, nutrition, all that kind of jazz. Feel free to ask any questions, and we'll speak to you again soon. And thank you very much, Simon. See you soon.
Thanks, Tom. See you again, listeners. Bye-bye.